Hello and welcome to another Hun's History Nest podcast, where history is enjoyed and salvaged forever. This is a podcast on First Americans and exploration, and what we're going to do is, first of all, determine where the first natives to the United States, how they came to be in our nation. Our investigation begins here with the theory of evolution, and what we want to do is determine where did the first ancestors that were somewhat primate, somewhat human, where did they originate? And we're going to use this concept of Pangaea. Could have been when we were one giant continent. The first place that was first ever found with any type of bones was here in Africa, in Asia. The second was Africa, and this was back in the 1970s. This was in the early 1900s, but the most recent was found here in Central America. This was in 2004. And these bones, the most famous was that of Lucy, seen here and here, and her bones were found in Africa. And she was nearly a fully, as we see over here on the left, almost a full skeleton of bones. The head was primarily primate and the body more human-like. Many have argued that the concept of Pangaea, or one giant continent, doesn't correspond with the time frame of 30,000 BC when this happened, as seen here. Therefore, it's determined that the first ancestors probably crossed into North America or the United States, Alaska, across the Bering Strait from Asia, seen here. And they crossed a land bridge known as Beringia. These earliest of ancestors of the Native Americans were probably following their food source, woolly mammoths, as seen here, across Beringia into North America. Archaeologists who study the past and are scientists, they study the past using artifacts, which can be anything left behind. And some of the artifacts that have been found are called the Clovis Point. And this is the most important of discoveries. The Clovis Point is essentially to us kind of like a arrowhead or even a spearhead. And these items are what were found. And these were made from flint rock. And this flint rock was chipped to make these into tools. And this is what has been used to basically determine the lifestyle of this group of individuals who now are nicknamed the Clovis people. In an effort to link together the Clovis people 30,000 years ago with the Europeans, we need to determine why would Europeans want to come to the New World. And thus this formula of land plus wealth equaling power comes into play. Europeans from here wanted to get to new lands and will accidentally do so, all in an effort to maintain their power so that they are not taken over by other empires. There are essentially 5 empires in the Age of Discovery, but one of them is very different than the other 4, and that is the empire of the Vikings. And this is because they are the one that is not Catholic, they are not Christian, and this will separate them from the others. They will not be interacting with the European empires and thus will have a separate exploration history. The Vikings historically prayed to gods like Odin, seen down here, all in an effort to reach their heaven, which is Valhalla. And this separated them from the history of the Europeans quite a bit. The exploration of the Vikings begins with that of Eric the Red, and he is famous for having set up a colony in today's Greenland in 985. As the story goes, another adventurer, Bjarni Herjolfsson, searches for Eric the Red's settlement and goes off course. And he accidentally comes upon what we believe to be today's area of Cape Cod in Massachusetts. Eric the Red's son, named Eric's son Leif, he later will go back to where Bjarni had explored, and Leif Erikson will return to Cape Cod, Newfoundland, and the Baffin Island area, thus putting the Vikings as being perhaps the first non-natives to North America or our United States. Because Europeans and Vikings did not communicate, the story which gets Europeans to get to Asia is going to be the story of Marco Polo. A moderately wealthy merchant from Italy will go along the Silk Road, as seen here on the map, all the way to the Mongolian Empire, where he will become friends with Kublai Khan. And this friendship will result in his writing of a book, The Adventures of Marco Polo, which will describe two very important things, silk and spices. And these items will be a commodity that Europeans will want, and thus trying to get here or here becomes a very important part of European exploration. The story of European exploration begins with that of the Portuguese and Prince Henry, as seen up here on the left. And Prince Henry establishes a navigation school which has four major things: map making, the spreading of Catholic faith. In addition to spreading the Catholic faith, these explorers also want to bring back samples and discover new land or claim it for the empire. At the navigation school were three individuals that were primarily competing with one another to be the first explorers: Bartholomew Diaz, Vasco da Gama, and a guy by the name of Columbus. It would be Diaz that would get the first exploration, and Christopher Columbus would become very upset and ultimately leave to go seek another empire to sponsor him. That will be another topic coming in a moment. The two explorers, Diaz and da Gama, begin to work on finding their route to Asia, as seen down here in the lower right-hand corner. The red being Diaz and the blue being da Gama, who eventually finishes and gets to India. Christopher Columbus ultimately gets sponsored by Spain, and he has a whole different concept as to what he wants to do. He believes that he wants to sail west to reach the east, which was not a normal thinking process, and a lot of people were a little bit hesitant to sponsor him. But the King and Queen of Spain, competing with Portugal, decided to do so. That would be Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, and they sponsored his voyage. He never does reach India. He believes he does, but he does not. The place that he reaches is seen over here in the far left, as he will reach the West Indies, as we will call them today, believing he's in India. Bottom line is, he's discovered a whole new area of exploration. The Spanish will go back after the explorations of Columbus several times. The first will be Vasco Núñez Balboa after him, and Balboa will basically come to see the Isthmus of Panama, and this will then set up another reason to come, because he witnesses Native Americans totally and completely wearing gold. And then the Spanish will send conquistadors led by Hernando Cortez and then later Francisco Pizarro. And Cortez will conquer the Aztec Indians, and Pizarro will conquer the Incan Indians. Atatalpa will be the leader of the Incan Indians, and Montezuma the leader of the Aztecs. The Native Americans in the New World will be easily conquered, as seen here in number 5, because of the use of gunpowder, cannons, and the horse. But probably the most devastating to the natives was smallpox being spread. Bottom line is, the Portuguese and the Spanish become very powerful, and it will be quite some time before the French and English will be able to compete with them. Rather than compete in conquering land, the English will decide to become pirates of sorts and rob from the Portuguese and Spanish. And these pirates were nicknamed sea dogs. The most famous seen here is Sir Francis Drake. Another will be Sir Walter Raleigh. And the Spanish and the Portuguese will become upset with this and decide to unite themselves. And in doing so, they will attack England, and the armada, or group of ships that are formed, will be defeated. And this will end the reign and power of Spain and Portugal and leave it to that of France and England. Again, we are going chronologically by empire, and this is the French exploration. The first will be Giovanni Verrazzano, and he will basically lead this and find the areas of Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and the Straits of Belle Isle as seen here. Then Jacques Cartier will come back and look over the St. Lawrence Seaway area, and then you'll notice the big drop in time. This drop in time, you'll notice, is from 1530s all the way to 1608, and that's during the time in which Spain and Portugal are very powerful. But after the destruction of the Armada, the French feel safe, and they come back and decide to create a permanent settlement known as Quebec. And Samuel de Champlain, the father of New France, will establish this. Later, two trappers come upon the Mississippi River, and then Sieur de La Salle will travel the length of the Mississippi River, as seen down here in the lower right, and in doing so will eventually establish what we know as Louisiana in honor of King Louis of France. And this is also where Orleans, or New Orleans, will be founded. And lastly, we have the exploration of the English, which is not as vast as all the other nations, and they are separated here. 1497 is when John Cabot first explores, versus 1609 with Henry Hudson. And again, the same reasonings as the French. This is during the time period in which Spain and Portugal are very, very powerful. Cabot is the first one that gets to the New World, Newfoundland. And later, Henry Hudson will establish some areas of exploration like the Hudson Bay area, as seen here. And then later, he will be sponsored by the Dutch. And this is when he returns and goes to the area of today's New York, seen here, and establishes a colony there for the Dutch known as the New Netherlands, which is today's area of Albany, New York, on the Hudson River, named after him. This thus ends the first set of notes, New Americans and Explorations.